Good afternoon, all, and good morning to some, and welcome to today's webinar entitled The Evolution of Connectivity in the Hyperscale Economy. My name is Bill Thompson, and I'm Vice President of Marketing at DC BLOX. Many in the industry know that there has been lots of discussions about data center growth and the massive investments by the hyperscalers. But equally transformative is the impact on networks and connectivity, considering the workloads continuing to move to the cloud, as well as the burgeoning impact of AI on digital infrastructure. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions during the panel discussion, please enter them in the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, the Q&A tab, which we'll be monitoring, and we'll do our best to address the questions during the webinar. For those that have registered, we will be sending a recording of the webinar afterwards to all participants. We're excited to have an esteemed panel today to provide insights into this ongoing evolution, and I'm happy to introduce you to Craig Matsumoto, who will be the host of today's panel. Craig Matsumoto is a senior research analyst in the 451 Research Technology Research Group within S&P Global Market Intelligence. He covers distributed edge infrastructure, networking, and interconnection for the data center services and infrastructure channel. In the networking sphere, Craig's current research focuses on cloud-native networking services, including multi-cloud connectivity. He also covers distributed edge clouds, such as content delivery networks, and tracks issues related to distributed data and on-demand infrastructure management. And with that, I'll turn it over to Craig.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Let me start sharing a screen. So we are here to talk about the evolution of connectivity in the hyperscale economy. And thanks for the introduction, Bill. Joining me on our panel, we've got two excellent experts, Hunter Newby and Jeff Wabik, and I will let them introduce themselves. Hunter, why don't you start, and then we'll give Jeff a go.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks everybody for having me. So my name is Hunter Newby. I own Newby Ventures, basically a family office. I make directed investments in a couple of different spheres, one of which is network neutral infrastructure, which is a space that I've been in for about 25 years now. Mostly carrier hotels, meet me rooms, neutral cable landing stations, long haul fiber, but neutral interconnection at its core. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Good day, everybody, whatever time zone you're in. My name is Jeff Wabik. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at DC BLOX. As I heard Hunter go back through his brief history of time, as I look at myself in the screen here, I'm like, who's that old guy looking back at me? Because it doesn't seem like I have been engaged in technology and these types of ecosystems for 35 years now. Don't know how this happened. Don't know how I got this old. But here we are at DC BLOX. I've been here since we were doodling on cocktail napkins about how to build connected data centers. And it's been an interesting, sometimes roller coaster, but at least an interesting journey as we've now grown and expanded into serving the hyperscalers and started putting fiber in the ground and serving the multiple continents with subsea cables. So it's an interesting time. Excited to be here and contribute.
Sorry about that. I assume I missed all of Jeff's introduction, or Jeff, if you're still going, you could keep going.
No, that's enough about me, so you can go.
Yeah, speaking of networks, where were we? Many apologies for that, even though it wasn't my fault.
Back to you, Craig.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about data centers, the cloud, and networks. We're going to start on the data center front. Just kind of go over the state of the current generation of data center buildouts and why it's a little bit different. We're going to get specific next by talking about geographically what this means and the implications it has on infrastructure, particularly networking. Most of that discussion, believe it or not, is not necessarily going to tie directly to AI. I mean, it certainly is motivated strongly by what's happening with AI, but we don't necessarily have to bring AI into the discussion. At the end, if we have a few minutes, I do have a couple of pretty pictures to show about where AI is going in terms of physically where the workloads are being
Mhm. Is it me?
Thank you.
It's not me. It's Craig. You guys can hear me, right? Hi. Okay.
Greg, you're off. You're offline, or you're frozen.
I think his Wi-Fi is having issues, maybe.
Makes me question the way we built the internet.
Yeah. Well,
Something it's still a marvel that it works. It's amazing that it works as well as it does, but it is not without burps.
well, we lost Craig. But since we're all still here, I think I'll say a few words to keep people entertained,
Sure.
as I like to do. Data center is a funny term to me. It's actually two words, and as you just saw on that slide, sometimes it's one word. So I think it has a lot of different definitions, and it's a very, very broad subject. Sometimes they're single tenant, sometimes they're multi-tenant, sometimes they're enterprise, sometimes they're cloud. And now with AI, which Craig was just referring to, sometimes they're for training models and sometimes they're not. And they're all different. So it's really hard to, you know, start a conversation with a term like data center, which has so many definitions that it almost doesn't mean anything, and narrow it down to what it is. And then AI is also particularly interesting. Um, I find that a lot of people that are talking about AI are actually they themselves based on artificial intelligence. They don't really know what it is, but they talk about it. And again, it's all these different things you have to delineate and define because it really is driving how networks are being built. So Craig's back.
What I miss, Hunter?
I just stepped in a little bit and did some ad-lib chat.
Little soft cue, little song and dance. It was great.
Back to you, Craig.
It is more than a little ironic that we are here to talk about the necessity of having a strong, robust, and reliable network.
Proving the point.
Yeah.
Why is that so important? Okay. The meat of the discussion. Data centers are moving into new territories in a literal sense, in a geographic and physical sense. Uh, we at 451, we started having conversations about this even before the current surge in Gen AI interest. Just organic cloud growth was starting to present a problem. And the reasons are fairly self-evident. Data centers take up space. They do need water. They take up a lot of power. And in the advent of Gen AI and massive GPU farms, actually, come to think of it, in the advent of cryptocurrency separately, that power pressure has become more and more noticed. So some areas are running out of power and don't want any more data centers. Some regions, some countries are afraid of running out of power and don't want more data centers. That's led to a hunt for locations that are suitable for hyperscale buildouts, for large scale data center buildouts, where you have a combination of available power commitments and also of just sheer land. Everybody cannot build in Northern Virginia infinitely, right? Uh, in addition to looking for that combination of land and electricity, you do need to find a population, a community that's willing to accept new data centers, because headlines have started coming out about how much power data centers take up, how many resources they take up, and there's been some pushback. Separately, another factor that I think has contributed here is just the ubiquity of the cloud. We're at a point where you can argue pretty much all of us depend on the cloud in some one way or another. We're either using it directly or using an application that resides in the cloud. So as the cloud usage population has spread, it's become more practical for the hyperscale cloud vendors to start dropping little mini regions in areas where they didn't consider before. I'm going to use AWS local zones as my example. The very local zones are individual data centers as opposed to the multiple data center availability zones that are the normal AWS architecture. And the first one was placed in Los Angeles. And when they announced that, I thought to myself, well, that's fine. That makes a lot of sense because they're serving Hollywood, right? You have animators, you have special effects people who need to collaborate in real time on very large video files. They will need to do that with at the lowest latency they can possibly get. So it makes sense to serve them up with their own little cloud region. I thought at the time that that might be the only AWS local zone that was ever built, or that maybe we would hear about one or two every 5, 7 years. I was so wrong. At this point, in just a few years, AWS has activated 34 local zones, according to their website. 16 more have been announced, and I don't expect them to stop. So the ubiquity of the cloud has also led cloud providers to start thinking beyond their traditional regions, looking for ways to fill in the gaps in the map, so to speak. As all of this builds out, another point I wanted to make. Historically, whenever a hyperscale cloud starts sprouting up someplace, we've seen other data centers come and follow them. They build their own little community of digital capability. So all of this needs networking. People who want to be proximate to the cloud, obviously they need to connect into the cloud. And whatever customers those other data centers are serving, or whoever owns them, need to connect out to the outside world as well. You then get the effect of the n squared effect of cloud regions needing to connect to one another. We need a way to robustly connect into the wider internet. New cloud locations require new networks. And when I say new networks, I'm not talking about just the network that you need to connect into the cloud, just simple cloud communication. Something interesting has been happening with data that I want to use as a illustration of why the network is so important. Enterprises at this point in their cloud maturity are starting to think about how to care for their data and whether they really want all their data to be in one cloud, for example, whether it's useful to continue having data in one cloud if one application that's feeding off of that data is in another cloud. So data migration has been real and has involved large data sets. I have some stats here from a recent data survey we did, a recent storage survey we did at 451, just asking if organizations have migrated data between the cloud and some company-owned or company-controlled data center, maybe a colo facility, maybe the actual company data center. 40% of them said, yes, they have done that. 40% also said they have moved data sets, like not just any data, but chunks of data from one cloud to another. It's part of the multi-cloud reality. And they've been doing these things even though there is a cost to them, right? There is an egress charge that gets charged if you want to move your data out of the cloud. But the motivation is strong enough that this has happened. And in fact, in a separate question, we asked enterprises if they've ever had to migrate a petabyte or more of data. Just have you ever made that leap of moving a huge chunk of data either into or out of the cloud? 40% of them said yes, they have, which I have to admit is larger than I thought. Also, incidentally, it's a little bit annoying that all of the percentages here are 40%. That's just how the numbers fell. But it's not just large data chunks, large migrations that we have to worry about. A lot of applications need reliable connections to the cloud on a regular basis. Here we just asked enterprises how often they move data to or from the cloud. 22% said continually. You think of applications like games that need constant communication. That makes sense. Another 36% say they at least need to move data weekly, if not daily. And if you look over on the right-hand side, that 19% who say they move data as needed, I mean, you could make a leap and say that that just means they rarely do it. But in my mind, what that means is they need to do it at unpredictable times. And when they need to move data, they're going to need the network to be up and ready and reliable, even if they haven't dusted it off in a while. So again, a reliable network becomes a necessity for the people who are working with the cloud. Being a network guy, I couldn't resist throwing this question into a survey, if you don't mind a little digression here. It's just about what people are using their quote unquote cloud networking for. Obviously, the top answer was connecting themselves into the public cloud, but all of the other permutations you can think of come up with a pretty solid response. Connecting data centers to each other, connecting clouds to edge locations. The one that intrigued me was the third bar down. It's the one that says connecting environments located within separate public clouds. In other words, are you using the multi-cloud in such a way that one cloud and another have to talk to each other? I figured some percentage of enterprises would be doing that since pretty much all of them have some kind of multi-cloud presence. 31% though said that they are buying a network service specifically for connecting one cloud to another. It's larger than I expected, and it's going to get bigger. This question is a little bit complicated, but we basically asked a yes/no question where we said to enterprises, okay, combination of things. Are you using multiple clouds? Uh, uh, do you move data between those clouds? And do you expect to purchase additional network services in the next 24 months to serve that cloud-to-cloud connection? That's a lot of qualifiers, but almost 70% of people said, yes, all of that applies to us. So when we talk about cloud networking, it isn't necessarily just from one building, one enterprise building into the cloud. It's a whole mesh of connectivity uh, between data centers, between clouds, in and out of different regions. So let's make this a little bit more real by showing you some maps and talking about what we mean when we say the cloud is moving into new territories. This is going to be a very US-centric discussion, so apologies to any audience members who are outside the country and maybe don't know the geography well enough. But the United States is, because of the shape, the width, frankly, of the country, it illustrates what we're talking about. What you're seeing here comes from the 451 data center knowledge base. It is essentially a measure of the hyperscale data centers, just the hyperscalers, including social media and the public clouds, all those guys. A measure of the hyperscale data centers by state in the United States. The numbers might be a little bit hard to see, but just understand that the darker a state is, the more power is being devoted to data centers in those states. So you can see, for example, on the West Coast, Oregon is extremely dark. Toward the East Coast, Northern Virginia is obviously a data center hotspot. It's slightly lighter. It's got older data centers, though. Oregon has a lot more of the GPU kind of stuff happening. This is the current picture, or the picture as of the end of 2023. The next slide is going to show the same map, but with our projections for where data centers are going, again, measured in terms of power, from 2024 to 2029. So as I flip, you can see the shaded in states are different. You've got new territories getting a lot of attention. Some existing ones getting attention too. Texas is doubling down on the whole data center thing. And obviously, Northern Virginia has to do something to accommodate all of the customers that are already there. But look at the number of states that didn't necessarily have strong data center presence before, who are suddenly getting it now. This is what we mean by data centers moving into new territories. They're exploring new geographies. So what does this mean for the infrastructure? And hey, can we expect that all of the networks that we would want for these data centers are already in place? Obviously, the answer is not going to be yes, or we wouldn't be talking about this. So, Hunter, I'd like to set you up for this part of the discussion. I took this map off of your site, Hunter, off of newbieventures.com, which has a widget using data from peeringdb.com. These are the number of internet exchanges by U.S. states. So, Hunter, why don't you tell us a bit more about what we're seeing here and why it's a challenge?
Sure. Thanks, Craig. It's newbie-ventures.com.
UB Dash Ventures, right?
We're looking for it. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so several years ago, well, going back 20 years ago, I researched the US for looking for the meet me rooms in the carrier hotels, in the major markets in North America. And I did that as my preemptive due diligence strategy to then go roll up as many of those as I could. And I was successful in getting a lot of them, whether it was the carrier hotel and or the meet me room, or a building that didn't have a meet me room needed to be developed, and so on. And then a few years ago, I decided to revisit that series in order, but this time see where the largest internet exchanges were in those same markets. And lo and behold, the largest internet exchanges are in the very same meet me rooms that I featured 20 years ago. Now, how did I know? How could that be? It's pretty simple. Networks go to where networks already are. And then I extrapolated that through this API into PeeringDB, which is fantastic. PeeringDB, for those that don't know, is basically the resource for all internet exchanges, internet exchange points, which would be where the IX physically is located, and ASNs, or autonomous system numbered networks, that are located in those exchange points. And this map represents the US. This is real-time data. So the API calls are every day, and then the data on the site's updated, the next morning. And this shows you very clearly, and it's deep. You go to the site and you can click down on each state. You can look at within the state, the actual sites, the facility owners, the exchange that's there, what networks are connected to it, etc. And also whether they're virtually there or physically there, which is a really important and distinct point for localizing traffic. And that's going to become incredibly important for inference and generative AI, but we'll talk about that later. But you can see here that the United States has several states that do not have a single internet exchange in it. Again, PeeringDB is the user-generated content. So if you're a facility owner, internet exchange owner, or a network with an AS, it's incumbent upon you to go to PeeringDB and create your own record, and then announce where you are. And everyone in the industry that knows this is what they use. Then they rely on it. And I'm talking about the big content providers and cloud and everything. This is how they figure out where to go to get connected, literally to the address, to the facility in the building. So same as your map, the darker colors represent states that have more exchanges. But even though certain states have darker colors and more exchanges, they're typically concentrated into a few cities. They're not evenly distributed. And that's because none of this was designed or done by decree. It's not regulated. It doesn't come from the FCC or anything like that. Internet exchanges, which is really an involvement of internet protocol, the internet itself, and other protocols that support it, like Ethernet, etc. They evolved and grew inside of the legacy telco, carrier hotel, TDM, PSTN, copper coax facilities, formerly SONET, and everything's migrated to wavelengths, Ethernet and IP. So the largest internet exchange points were born inside of the legacy carrier hotel meet me rooms, where all of the networks already physically met on the legacy protocols. What we're looking at here, though, in addition to the states that only have one exchange, of which there are many, and again, everyone's free to go look and see what that exchange is and how many networks are actually connected to it. The country, about half, so let's just call it 50 states, half either have no exchange or only one, and the one only has a handful of ASs. That's half of the United States. So in terms of developing markets and third world nations, the US has many. So in addition to fiber development and deployment of capital to build fiber, and deployment of capital to build, quote unquote, data centers, what does that mean? Let's just say it's a big building for a hyperscaler, for them, just them, to do something, cloud or AI or whatever. There is a tremendous need to build new neutral multi-tenant interconnection facilities, not data centers, where the fiber that's being built goes to for the purposes of hosting an internet exchange, which would be a layer 2 Ethernet switch that facilitates the VLAN of IP traffic locally. And that then can lead towards, if all of the routers actually route the bits locally there, the reduction of latency, which is incredibly essential for a flavor of AI. It's not just about cloud and content distribution, gaming, and reducing latency, for a better user experience. We're entering a time where there's a real solid ROI, particularly for banks, for lenders like commercial banks, consumer banks, in fraud detection and fraud protection. And that has to occur exactly where the fraud is initiated. In order for them to do that, they have to get closer to it, to collect keystrokes and, POS machines and terminals and things. So you could look, these are whole states that don't have a single place where that occurs today. We have a map, and we see, big power deployments, Craig, as you were pointing out, for the large scale data centers. And we clearly have a map as to where we need to go to build new neutral interconnection facilities and then tie it all together. And I don't know how long it's going to take. It'll be years, but we know what we have to do. We have our work cut out for us. But anyway, thanks for showing the map. I hope that was a
Yeah, and Hunter, I'll just follow up because there's a question from the audience that I think is essentially a summary of where you're going and where we're all going with this. Is the Meet Me room or the IX the core, and data centers build around them, or
yes.
are data centers going to be the core with a Meet Me room or an IX built to support them?
That's a great question. So, two things. It all depends on how you define these words. Okay. So let's just say that for the purposes of this discussion, and it's sort of like any agreement that has a preamble with defined terms that are capitalized, we could have this discussion and we could say we're going to use these words. And in this context today, they mean this. And everybody could agree. And that could be on this, Zoom or at a conference or whatever. Other people use the same words in different times and places, and they have different definitions. So it changes. So I'm just going to say core to me has always meant the meet me room in a carrier hotel. And sometimes carrier hotels didn't have a meet me room. They had a couple of, colos or whatever. And over time it's evolved. There's still some buildings that have a lot of networks in them, but don't have a defined meet me room. And even that's a term that sort of is implied to be owned by the owner of the building and run a certain way, but it's not necessarily the same every place you go. So putting that aside though, Craig had a data point that you found interesting, Craig, and I agree with you. The cloud to cloud connectivity. So that's data center to data center. That could be direct, right? Between even two, like, direct cloud zones by two different providers. I don't know, AWS and Google, let's say. And there's some user of that has an application that they need to do different things in different places, load balance or whatever. That doesn't necessarily have to go through a core neutral meet point. That could be a dedicated route. I'll give an example, just one of how that's happening and where. So basically, financial trading started with bespoke, unique, low latency routes. A lot of that's microwave because as the crow flies, it's just faster. RF is basically 99% of the speed of light anyway, but you don't have to deal with slack coils and sway and things like that, which add distance on fiber routes. Well, the cloud providers have taken in, I'm looking for the right word, swallowed many of the stock exchanges and commodities exchanges. They no longer stand alone and do their own thing, build their own data centers, have their own servers. They've moved into the cloud. So the high frequency people that used to build low latency routes between the exchanges, mercantile exchange, stock exchange, whatever, are now building low latency routes and have been for a couple of years between the clouds themselves. So that's the carve out, at least one, Bill, to the question as to whether the data centers are the core or the neutral meet points are the core. I guess it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And if you're trying to get between just two places very fast, that's what you're trying to do. AZ are two, unique bespoke buildings that have two very unique specific applications that you need to tie together. Whereas if you need to penetrate a market to get to a city, to get to the vast number of machines and eyeballs in that city for a purpose, your best bet from an economies of scale perspective is to go to a neutral meet point that already has all those last mile networks there, both fixed line, wireless, whatever, hopefully the MNOs, although they do their own routing, and that the ASs will be present on a layer 2 exchange, and that you could build in there and deliver whatever it is you need to at that point and exchange that data traffic there. So from a multi-tenant network interconnection perspective, that's the core. And from a bespoke application, that probably isn't relevant because you need just the shortest distance between the 2 points. Again, I hope that makes sense. It depends what you're talking about in every instance. And sometimes the words are used that they're the same, but they have different definitions in those contexts.
So I specifically try not to get hung up on names. I was talking with somebody the other day. So I'm here in Atlanta, 56 Marietta is down the street, 56 Marietta, you can call it a carrier hotel, you can call it internet exchange, you can call it a data center, because I know there are people in there just running, servers and storage and whatnot. And somebody said, well, why is it an internet exchange? And I had to pause for a second because I've just sort of grown up with that building being called an internet exchange or a carrier hotel. And I had to pause and say, how do I explain this to somebody that doesn't really understand what happens in that building or the equivalent buildings that are depicted by numbers and headcounts here on this slide that's currently being shown? And I said, well, I think you start off with a building that's a data center, and people move their stuff in, and then they need to connect to stuff, either themselves or other business partners, or maybe carriers or whatever. And at some point, you just get a critical mass, and this has happened, in our DC blocks facilities, right? Some of these guys have started off being really small, 5 and 10,000 foot buildings, and we started selling infrastructure and capacity to retail customers, this legal firm, that credit union, whatever it is. Then a carrier moves in to service them. Then another carrier moves in to service them, or carrier neutral. Neutrality, Hunter, as you point out, is the key to this, right? Making sure that anybody can connect to anybody, and that the operator of the facility doesn't stand in the way of that. And at some point, in a couple of these facilities, we're like, how do we get critical mass, right? We've got dozens of carriers that are in here, and they're talking to each other. I don't even know what they're doing. I don't even know what they're doing when they talk to each other. So I try not to get hung up on names, because we clearly built data centers, but now I can point and say, well, there's a whole lot of peering going on in there. There's a whole lot of carriers in there. There's a whole lot of hyperscalers in there. There's a whole lot of cloud providers in there. And you don't necessarily know what they're doing as the infrastructure provider, but I try not to put a name on it. I'm just satisfied that it's happening.
Yeah. So that's a great reference, 56 Marietta. Especially for me, it's the first carrier hotel I ever bought. Bought it with Telex 20 years ago, actually, May 2004. And the terminology internet exchange is very precise, very specific in the industry of internet exchanges. So the reason why that it would be referred to as that is because there's an internet exchange. There's actually a layer 2 Ethernet switch fabric in there, not just one, but it was originally the LAN Internet Exchange. And I bought that from Michael Lucking a long time ago. And that became the very first telex internet exchange. Not that I actually wanted to be in that business, but I felt strongly that the AIX needed to be protected, because more than half of the physical real estate tenants of the building were connected to it. And it was challenging back then from an SLA perspective to get a hold of Mike. So I wanted that to become more in-house. And then developing the meet room in the building on the second floor. It's one of my favorite buildings, and great city and great people. But that is definitely a carrier hotel first, with an internet exchange, a defined thing that's a layer 2 switch that then provides public peering, offload, right? Avoiding the public internet, avoiding transit. And yes, you're right. There were tenants in there that had floors that provided server colo space, which we would call data centers. It's all there. But then there's also lots of buildings that are built elsewhere in Atlanta and in the greater metro area that tether to it.
Sure.
A lot of things tether back to 56 and 55, but a lot 56. And those things that tether back are more data centers, but today it's evolved, and now there's distributed layer 2 Ethernet switches there for a distributed switch fabric. And these are semantics.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, Jeff. It's really hard to get down in the weeds on a lot of these names and studs and definitions, because people get hung up on it. But it's also doing a disservice or injustice to have a big conversation and just say data center the whole time. And
Yeah.
I know this, dealing with governors and states with broadband and BEAD money and broadband funds, where everyone just says the word broadband, and it means so many things that it's very hard to explain what it is. And data centers, governors have historically given away a lot in tax incentives and whatnot, thinking that a single tenant data center for a large hyperscaler is going to actually have a positive, beneficial impact on local broadband, which it does not. And
So I'll just make a quick comment. Craig's got a lot of slides he wants to go through. So I'll just say this. Heard what you said, layer 2 switch, bunch of people connect to it. That's an internet exchange. Certainly can do it that way. I guess my perspective, and this is me, maybe I'm an oddball, right? But I tend to think about it more spiritually. Like, I know there's plenty of private peering going on down at 56 Marietta and in our facilities as well. And I would characterize that as exchanging internet traffic, thus internet exchange. So I tend to think about it a little bit more spiritually. It's like, what's all happening? Lots of technology can do anything, right? We say that all the time. It's like, what do you need to do? Well, I could invent a piece of technology to do it. So I guess my view is just a little more spiritual, that, internet exchange is where what you make of it, as opposed to saying it's got to be a layer 2 switch. But I'll stop.
I dig it.
Okay. Yeah. But Jeff, I like your point. If I am articulating it correctly, that just the presence of data centers and the presence of the beginnings of a presence of a network sort of leads to more networking, It leads to you. It sounds like you have customers who, like you said, start small, and then found they wanted that they got more ambitious. They wanted to reach out to more places, connect to more things.
Yeah,
Is that
I'm gonna hijack a phrase that I heard Hunter use. Moving forward, I'm gonna hijack one
yeah
of your phrases. Networks go where networks are.
yeah yeah
Right. And I think that's great. I never thought about putting those words together like that before, but that's the thing, right? It's like, again, sort of some of our small facilities just start off being retail, and then there's a carrier and another one, and the carrier says, "Hey, can I connect to that other carrier?" I'm like, sure, let's do that. And then that snowballs, right? And you never really quite know. I almost think of it like Legos. You've got all these parts and pieces. There's power and there's space and there's colo and the traditional data center pieces. There's a meet me room and there's point of entry room and there's a carrier. And if I think of all those things as being the little Lego pieces, right? It turns out that you can take those pieces and you can assemble them lots of different ways. You can have more traditional colo or more carrier hotel or whatever, because you can assemble those pieces however you want to make the toy that you want, right? And I'm not sure that any two toys, aka internet exchange points or data centers, whatever, in the world are the same because of just where they are and who got there first and who has the momentum and who's coming in to have access to that. So, we continue to grow. We have all the pieces, right? We all do, right? But it's just not specifically GC blocks, but we continue to grow the toy. We add more stuff to it. It's like, because we can do it. But I think it's, again, I try to not get so stuck in the nomenclature. I get more focused on the capabilities and what can we do and being open and affirming and welcoming to everybody talking to everything. Because there's one thing that's clear, right? There's a epic symbiosis between big data and the ability to move that data around between the data sets or the people or the consumers or the producers. That symbiosis is only getting stronger and stronger.
yeah that makes sense. Actually, I think some of what you said, I know we're lingering on this slide for a while, but some of what you said I think resonates with the question that got asked. I want to point to Texas. So the question, if I'm remembering the question right now, what was the chicken and egg thing between where data centers go and where networks and internet exchanges go. So we saw in a previous slide that Texas is very aggressively attracting data center business. And based on what I said at the beginning, these are going to be in some new pioneer kinds of regions within Texas, locations that don't already have a high population of data centers. So when we look at the internet exchange map here, Texas is all dark and it's got 18 internet exchanges, but I'm going to guess those 18 internet exchanges are not evenly distributed across the face of Texas. That somebody doing some large, ambitious build out in West Texas might not have one next to them. Hunter, is that the case?
That is the case.
Yeah, they're basically in Dallas, right?
Yeah,
So even
they're in Houston. There's a few
okay,
cities.
Houston exists. You're right.
Yeah, more than exists. And DKIC just announced that they're going to Houston, so
Okay.
that's pretty
Okay.
significant. But you make a great point. Texas as a state is larger than Western Europe. Think about that.
Yeah.
You're talking about the U.S. centric. The United States of America is a country, and so is Luxembourg. The geographical disparity of those two things is tremendous. Even Germany, a country that I like a lot and have been to many times, the birthplace of DKICs, is very small compared to the United States. So
Yeah.
when you think about geography, proximity, capital, right? CapEx, ROI. How hard is it to build out fiber to every square inch of Luxembourg versus the United States? When the OECD ranks the US like way down low in broadband speeds and penetration, take the others that are above the United States and make another chart which compares total square kilometers and population density.
Yeah.
And the US will be the top. So it's really hard to do that, right, in a normal capitalistic way if you're directing government funds to be built systematically like the interstate highway system here in the United States. You can build a complete system based upon origination, destination, cities, and routes. And it still takes a long time, but it's fully funded. We don't have that benefit today. Haven't since the original Bell telephone system and the public subsidy that it received to fund its own CapEx. We don't have that. So to Jeff's point about networks go to where networks are, which is something I say all the time, and that's where we're building the toy here. Well, The difficult thing is where networks aren't today, all meeting and interconnecting gets bypassed, gets overlooked. And that's the problem because we need to build new ones of those, but because they don't exist, capital doesn't seem to have the creativity, okay, the vision to say, hey, there's a need for this thing here. They like to go to where
Yeah.
things are because they like to go to where assets are, where capital is, where networks already are that can be bound to contracts that are, you know, recurring revenue generating things.
But
That's your disparity that we have, and that's what this map really represents.
Mhm.
if I may, though, I think change is a brewing, right? The hardest piece of building a data center, building the facilities that we build, there's lots of complicated technical problems that we need to solve that just aren't easy at all, right? But if we think about the nature of the DC Blocks business right now, by far the hardest thing for us is finding available power. And if you're looking for power in Georgia or South Carolina, I'm going to tell you it's not in Atlanta, right? It's hard to find it in Atlanta. It's easier to find it, for example, places that you might just drive through and not even notice. So to your
Yeah.
point, right, all these underserved, if you will, parts of these states, the states that have a one in them or nothing in them. And what we find is, the hyperscalers who are now really reinventing global connectivity. They just are. They've got billions of dollars. It appears as though they got irritated with the telecom providers for whatever reason. They're building their own networks, right? But they're also looking for power, and there's power available in nowhere portion of Mississippi or nowhere portion of some other state, right? So the hyperscalers are moving in. They're buying big plots of land, bringing the power in, bringing epic connectivity in. And so you're seeing now, I think, a shift to, because we have to migrate to where power is, that's where these facilities start to develop. And I would bet a substantial portion of my net worth that South Carolina's got nothing in it. We have a cables landing station that we just fired up in Myrtle Beach. I think within the next, I colloquially say 20 minutes, not literally, but soon, South Carolina is going to have a one in it because that cable landing station is going to be an internet exchange because we've got power, we've got facilities, we've got carriers, we've got subsea cables. And those are the Lego building blocks of an exchange point or an internet exchange or whatever the nomenclature I don't like to use, whatever it is you want to use, right? I think there's going to be one in the state pretty soon.
Well, if
Yeah,
it's going to show
absolutely.
up on this map, Jeff, it's because DKIX is going to move into your CLS in Myrtle Beach, which I just visited a couple weeks ago. It's very nice.
Never
And
seen
DKIX does go into that facility. They're going to update their profile on PeriDB and say that they're there. And then South Carolina is going to have a one. And that's what's going to make it appear here because there's plenty of facilities. That's not what this map represents. But facilities with an IX is what this map represents in the US. And then it means that you can exchange traffic on a switch there locally. Doesn't mean that the internet IP exchange is not happening elsewhere in facilities that don't appear in this map. You're right. That's a good point. And as far as data centers and power and where the hypers are going, BTM, baby, behind the meter. They're getting autonomy and absolution from any oversight, and they are going to generate their own power because, yes, they have become disenchanted with the telcos. They became disenchanted with subsea, and they started building all their own, as you know, because that's who's landing in your facility there in Myrtle Beach. And they are now disenchanted with the entire utility industry. And they don't like the speed at which it moves or reviews things or approves anything, and it doesn't have enough power for it. So they're buying old nuclear power plants and trying to turn them back on and such. They're just going to go build their own power plants and generate power for their own data centers in wherever they
Maybe.
decide to go get land.
People ask me if we're going to start generating our own power with nuclear reactors. It's like, well, I'm not sure I really want to have. We have people a mile away from some of our facilities expressing concern that the 60 decibel sound coming from some of our air conditioning systems is going to somehow reach a mile and impact their lives. And they're making a fuss about that in some cases. I can't imagine the fuss that they would make if I said I had fissionable materials in my data center. But that's a different talk for a different time.
These won't be nukes, but you're right.
But it's very quiet.
Yeah, right.
I assume it's
Nuclear
quiet.
meltdown is in fact very quiet. Yes.
Cool.
Great point, Hunter, about the disenchantment of the hyperscalers with the established the established incumbent industries. That kind of ties into our next point. Look, I'm just going to jump to the punchline of this slide. This was from a network as a service survey that we did at 451, and the bottom line is that the telcos are not necessarily the go-to entities if you want to connect data centers and clouds anymore. There are plenty of other people who do it with a very cloud-like experience that the telcos have never latched onto. 10 years ago, I covered the birth of software-defined networking, SDN, which was the promise that networks could be controlled in software, that everything could be automated, and if you wanted to, you could put all that control in the hands of the end users so that they wouldn't have to keep calling the telco for changes and extra bandwidth and things like that. It never really came to fruition at the telcos. It's starting to, but in fits and starts. In the meantime, a whole bunch of other companies leapt in on that opportunity and started doing what the telcos should have been doing in the first place. So these range from the interconnection specialists like Megaport, connecting data centers to clouds, to pure software companies like Aviatrix, who put that control in your hands. Now, they are not necessarily the ones building the fiber, and that's what I want to discuss with this slide as backdrop. The fiber has to come from somewhere, and in a lot of cases, that somewhere is the public clouds themselves. As Hunter mentioned, they built out their own subsea, they built out their own networks. They offer services where you can ride on their backbone networks, send your data around the globe that way. The telcos have not really swarmed in to fill this void as we've seen the cloud expand. Like even before the advent of Gen AI, before the recent surge of interest in Gen AI, even before then, it was clear that networks were going to be needed to serve some of these new locations, and telcos didn't exactly jump at the opportunity. We're finally seeing Lumen do it. Lumen has said they picked up.
Uh-oh. I think we lost Greg again.
Burped again.
Yeah. Lumen got a big contract from Microsoft and Meta,
Yeah.
commitment to spend. That helped them financially restructure themselves. And there were a couple of significant reasons why the two folks that did that wanted to do that. So they got a lot of money to spend with them, and they're going to tell them how to build their network going forward. Deterministic infrastructure from two hyperscalers that don't want to be licensed carriers, directing a licensed carrier to get right away, build duct a certain way, handles, manholes, ILAs. Good. It's about time. The US has needed an upgrade in long haul glass for a long time, and I like the designs of the hyperscale long haul, particularly
Yeah.
Meta's. I like Meta's ILA design. Let's just put it that way.
Since we lost Craig for a few minutes, let me jump in with one of the audience questions.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I think they're latching onto the dilemmas we're talking about, kind of like the chicken and the egg concerning data centers and IXPs. My question is, once these pieces are in place, how do you achieve smart cities, intelligent transportation, autonomous vehicles? What hasn't there been any discussion about? Why hasn't there been any discussion about neutral wireless overlay for last mile? In my mind, this is the only way to achieve these loftier goals.
There's a lot in that question.
It's big. How much time we got left? 10
How much time we got left?
Maybe just
another hour.
Yeah.
Craig, you want to take that and get
A neutral wireless overlay. So I'm assuming that implies that you don't have someone like a Verizon building out 5G. It's neutral.
Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly neutral is referring to, but I do know that hyperscalers, at least in other countries, are investing in that kind of public Wi-Fi in order to address the concerns, because they want eyeballs. They want consumers on their platform, and if you can't get to the platform, you're not gonna be their customer. So I know there's investment going on there.
It's just an anecdote, right? So I guess, like I said, I'm in Atlanta. I live in Midtown Atlanta. I spend a lot of my time walking around through Midtown to go to the gym, go to restaurants, or whatever. And there's a lot of these public wireless sort of overlay providers that I think, my wireless carrier for my phone is AT&T, right? And they must partner with these guys, because as I'm walking down the street, suddenly, I'm doing something and suddenly it stops working. And it's like, whoa, what's going on? I look and suddenly I'm connected to Wi-Fi. It's like, I didn't connect to Wi-Fi. What Wi-Fi is this? And I look and it's a name I've never heard of before. And I try to, disconnect from it or forget the network, and it won't let me, which suggests that AT&T has decided it wants me to use its Wi-Fi partner rather than it wants me to use its 5G, right? And okay, I kind of get that in spirit, but the problem is, as I'm walking, It starts working and stops working. It makes me really angry, right? So I turn it off. I turn all Wi-Fi off, and I just go back to using 5G. And I think that's it, right? I think we talk about wanting to have the network be ubiquitous and be in our cars and be in our hands and be everywhere. And reliability is going to be the key, right? So how do we pump the kind of volume and traffic that we need through this thing while still being able to do the handoffs that took, candidly, the mobile industry decades to figure out
Yeah,
how to do a successful handoff and make it as reliable as it is, and that's still not perfect, right? So
it's a
that's my
legitimately
anecdote,
difficult
right?
problem.
That's my anecdote is how's this ever going to actually be reliable and push the kind of data that we want? We're getting closer, but part of this is really just what we're doing now, which is we still need foundation for all of this. Metro Atlanta's got a bunch of Wi-Fi networks I can connect to. A lot of cities just don't. So we still need to build a foundation, intrastate, interstate, intercontinent, intracontinent, and make that all work. And I think then you start to be able to layer these other things on top of it.
Well, my thinking is if you think about the smart city example,
Yeah.
if you're talking about a coordinated citywide kind of smart city effort.
Wow.
He might be gone for a second to get so I'm going to say, I don't know what smart city means. I kind of know what smart home means now, right? I say, hey, Alexa, turn on my lights.
Jeff,
What does it mean?
it's another one of those terms like
Cleveland,
data center or
turn on the
broadband. You don't know what it means. You don't like to deal with the semantics of the definitions of words. So I agree with you. Smart city doesn't really mean a lot unless you peel it back. And I'm a juror on the ICF, Intelligent Community Forum. I've been on there since '09. And every year we review cities in the world that apply for this smart city designation. And there are different categories, and there's many. There's one, which is infrastructure, which is sort of like the broadband infrastructure. And then there's workforce development, jobs, education, and all these other qualifiers. I am a crazy person about the physical air. And when I review all these cities' applications, they're from everywhere in the world, Scandinavia, Latin America, Asia, Canada, US, whatever. I go to the network map. I say, show me the network map. Who owns the network that you're building all the smart stuff on top of? Who owns it? How's it designed? Is there an internet exchange point? Is there even a reference to one? Who owns it and operates it? What ASs connect to it? What are the RTDs and latency to those different things that all the people in the city want to get to? If that's not there, to me, okay, and this is my opinion, I'm just one of many jurors, then you don't qualify as smart if you don't have neutral infrastructure upon which you're building it all. Because if there's one incumbent network that you're building the smart stuff on top of, in a few years, they're going to give you the bill. And they're going to tell you how much it costs. And it's not going to be affordable. And that's not so smart. So to me, and to your point, all this infrastructure needs to be built. I look at everything at layer 0, dirt first, manhole, POEs, vaults, then a building. I like modular interconnection, and everything else outside of that to me is data center. And if you can get that working right, have competition between networks for service, you have the lowest cost per bit, you have the lowest latency, you have the highest quality. Then you could build your smart city palaces and whatever. You can bring in overlays for open wireless and
what's your application for the smart city? That's the thing. I don't know what the application is. Again, is it, hey Cleveland, turn on the lights, or hey Cleveland, it's
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, let me jump into another question. The audience has taken over for Craig's absence, so appreciate them on that. Craig did mention Lumen, and we talked about the telcos maybe losing position, but Lumen, they've made a lot of AI data center announcements in conjunction with the hyperscalers. What do you see in terms of that trend and Lumen's foresight?
That'd be a Hunter question. I don't have as much visibility into what Lumen's been up to. Do you, Hunter?
Yeah, I'm paying attention to that. It's great. Look, they're a big network, they're an incumbent, they have rights of way, they have a lot of assets, they can get stuff done. Hyperscalers working with Lumen. A lot of it is the Lumen 214 CPCN rights for the dirt right away for the microdocs that the hyperscalers use to get their fiber around the country and other things, pole rights and whatever, that the hyperscalers don't want to be licensed and regulated. I get that. It's the same reason why they use, Telsius or whomever in the water, like for Murray and Brusa and other systems. They have landing parties that have rights to land and backhaul and get in ducts and poles and manholes and whatever, and take that fiber to where the hyperscalers want it to go without them having to be licensed as a carrier and regulated. So it's in keeping with that. Now, what's the rest of the capital commitment spend going to be spent on? Maybe Lumen will build data center structures. And again, this is shifting sands here. A data center is a construction project. Okay, it's a building. And it's coupled with power today if you can get it from the utilities. And since nobody can seem to get commitments from ERCOT or PJM or whoever that stick because they've oversubscribed it in their own back end, they need more generation. They're decomming old fossil stuff. Like I said, I think the hyperscalers are going to get permission from the White House, the DoD, to do BTM in some new way, clean, green, and limitless free energy that powers these building structures. And maybe Lumen's building them. But certainly on the fiber connectivity side, they'll play a very important role nationally, linking these structures, legacy and new. And deterministic routing, you can go to an incumbent or whomever and say, hey, I want this built at this price and this spec and this design. And if they take that order and give budgeted number that they'll meet and a time frame they get it completed, that's really all the hyperscalers want from anyone. Okay. Data center builder, fiber builder, subsea cable builder, or whatever.
That's what we're doing for them all the time. So Craig, now that you're back, I have a question for you. How do you feel about reliability as a cornerstone of all this solution space that we're talking about now that you've bummed out 3 or 4 times?
I feel very strongly about it now. Also, I'm so glad we're recording this.
You had to bring that up, Jeff. Jeez.
Yeah, but no, I was gonna say, Hunter, that's what hyperscalers are asking of us, right? We put big, we do construction projects, you call them data centers, you can call them whatever you want. Big buildings, concrete bunkers where people put their stuff and we keep it cold and safe and dry, and we make sure there's lots of power and the power never goes out. And then we snake cables, we trench new fiber for them wherever they want it to go. And it's really cool and exciting to see what they're doing, if not mind melting in terms of the scale. It's not like they're putting fiber in the ground and lighting 2 pairs, right? They're putting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of strands of fibers everywhere. And it's mind numbing to think about what their grand plans of how they have world conquest or domination in mind with all that capacity. But it's really cool.
I didn't, for the record, to my hyperscale friends, I didn't say that. Jeff did.
It was a joke.
As we're running out of time, Craig, I'm going to say, unfortunately, sorry for your gaps in our.
That's okay. Hey, it
but
was
I
your
think
fault.
if we could just go around and get each of your final parting comments on the topic of connectivity in the hyperscale economy.
Well, for me, it sounds like Hunter and Jeff took the discussion where I wanted it to go, which was the question of where is this fiber going to come from, right? Because the telcos have not participated strongly in just the service of connecting people to clouds and data centers, and they until now with Lumen had not seemed interested in laying down the fiber that hyperscalers need as well. And if it's going to be Lumen, and just Lumen, is it good to have just one company doing it? So your combined point that the hyperscalers are just looking for bespoke fiber routes that serve their needs, and that they're willing to contact folks like DC BLOX to get it done. That's where I wanted the conversation to go. And
then we kind of went there. I mean, Lumen's one.
Hunter, Jeff, final comments as we're running out of time here.
I was just going to say, Lumen's one, Zayo's one, Unity's doing it. Gigapower's there now between AT&T and BlackRock. They all of this, all the above. Okay, every tool in the bag, like the map showed. It's a big country, lots of miles. We got to build a lot of stuff. We got to connect it all. There should be standards at different layers. I like to focus on the neutral interconnection facility. DKIX is a really great internet exchange partner for us. There's data centers that do different things. There's submarine cables, there's terrestrial fiber, there's metro, there's long haul. Figure it out, standardize. Because if we all try to build it ourselves from whole cloth, it won't get done. And you need economies of scale. You need to bring people together with like minds that agree, and then pick the dots on the map, and then create those dots and build the routes between them. Basically, what DC BLOX, what you guys are doing, CLS in Myrtle Beach, backhaul to 56. Going to Huntsville, dropping different ILAs in, sizing things differently and appropriately for the markets along the way. A few of them are going to be bigger. That's a place to start. Design it today, though, that you can augment it later. The way that the long haul was built 20 years ago is very rigid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wabik, final thoughts?
Well, thoughts, just two words I want to throw out. First is symbiosis, and I said it earlier in this dialogue, right? There is a strong, robust symbiosis between the data that we either produce or consume and the connectivity that's required to push it from where it originated to where it needs to go. And both of those things are growing like crazy, but they're inextricably linked. It's like a chicken and egg, right? Which came first, the data center or the connectivity? You can't have one without the other. So symbiosis, and it only gets stronger. The second word I want to use is more. I say it all the time, M-O-R-E, more. Everybody just wants more of everything all the time. And I think it's what's driving these hyperscalers to build this, what I previously referred to as this mind-numbing amount of capacity. So, it's exciting to be involved in the symbiosis of more and see how this is evolving. It's as I said when I started, I've been in the technology space, in this space for like 35 years. And we were dealing with stone knives and bear skins 35 years ago compared to what we're doing now. And it's just super cool.
Well, we greatly appreciate our panelists and hosts, Craig and Hunter and Jeff. Been really an enlightening conversation. Learned a lot. For those who attended, thanks for your time. Hopefully it was useful to you as well. We hope to be in touch. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.